We're back with General George Casey, the Chief of Staff of the United States Army. Sir, let's talk a little bit about the future. What are some of the lasting lessons that you see from both the Iraq War and the current war, and how those lessons are going to shape the force of the future you envision?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is something that we study very hard because we're very conscious of our track record, frankly, not only as an Army but as a military, of continuing to fight the last war. And while we are learning and drawing lessons from Iraq and Afghanistan every day, we've taken a broader view and looked at how conflict may be in the 21st century. And you clearly are seeing some of that in Iraq and Afghanistan. But we also looked at what happened in Lebanon in the summer of 2006. And here you had Hezbollah, a non-state actor, a terrorist organization, operating inside one state, supported by two other states, fighting yet another state. And they had
with sophisticated weaponry.
They had the instruments of state power, exactly right. I mean, they had unmanned aerial vehicles. They had state-of-the-art surface-to-air missiles. They had state-of-the-art anti-tank guided missiles that inflicted 40% of the Israeli casualties. They had cruise missiles. They hit an Israeli corvette in the Mediterranean Sea. They had secure cell phones, secure computers. And they got their message out on local television. Now that's a hybrid threat that is much more complex and much more difficult to deal with than the 8th Guard Tank Army that I grew up having to fight.
So what does that mean in terms of how you're organized, trained, equipped, and what are the kind of dangers that you need to be able to combat then?
Yeah, exactly. And back in February 2008, we published our first doctrine, a major revision of our doctrine since 2001. And in that, we spelled out our main operational concept of full spectrum operations, that no matter where we fight across the spectrum of conflict, Army forces will use offensive, defensive, and stability operations to achieve their results. And this is a pretty fundamental change for us, and it's been a great internal debate within the Army, because when we started, we had the debate was it's either conventional war or regular war, and we're saying no, it's not.
How hard is it to convey that point, though? Because, for example, anybody who knows about how counterinsurgency operations are happening, armor and combined arms are integral to these operations, just in much, much smaller numbers than, for example, a division size or brigade size operation.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I said it was a great debate within the Army. But when I looked at this, the way I expressed it to people was when I was a division commander in Germany in 2000, and if you'd asked me, General Casey, where on the spectrum of conflict should you focus your training to be most versatile, I would have said if I can do conventional war, I can do anything. After 32 months in Iraq, I don't believe that, and neither do most of the people in the Army. And that's what this doctrine of full spectrum operations is about. Conflict in the 21st century is going to be different than conflict in the 20th century. And that's what we're preparing ourselves for. And it is not something where you throw a switch and everybody goes, aha, I got it. I mean, we are debating this and discussing this in our schools at every level. And it's a process that we're going to be going through for a while. So we are designing an Army for versatility. And if you think about it, the major organizing principle for not only the Department of the Army, but Department of Defense for 60 years has been conventional war.
Right. But against the peer adversary.
Right. But that's not what we're going to be doing in the 21st century. We may have to do some of that. But that's not certainly the most likely thing that we'll be doing in the 21st century.
Are the generation of leaders that are being bred in Iraq and Afghanistan better suited in some fashion to understand and to inculcate these lessons than your generation?
It's very interesting. What I tell the young captains and majors when I go out and see them, I tell them, you are so far ahead of where I was when I was in your rank in terms of your ability to understand warfare. Then you're way ahead of the game. They're combat seasoned veterans. I grew up in an Army that really had to relearn how to fight with the institution of the combat training centers there in the early 80s. Right. I mean, we went through a tough period in the 70s, and we had to build our warfighting skills back in the 80s.
More questions than we have time. We'll be right back. What's the future of the Army's ground vehicles going to look like? Find out next as we continue our talk with General George Casey, Chief of Staff of the United States Army.